Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to show you how to create animation in Unity, sprite-based animation in particular. So this tutorial will only cover how to create the animation, not to how to set up an animator or how to control it. So we'll have a separate tutorial for that. So to start us off, the first thing that you'll need to do is actually open your animation window. So I have a Unity project here already, and I kind of expect you to already have a project created, to already have a scene set up, maybe even have a player that can move. It doesn't really matter, but what you do need is the scene set up, and you need your animation sprites already created. So if you don't have those, you'll need to wait to follow this tutorial until after you have some sprites created with a sprite-based animation in them. So to create your sprite-based animation, the first thing you need to do is, like I said, get the animation window open. So to do that, you go up to the window menu at the top of Unity, and you go down to to animation, and then to animation. So that's window, animation, and animation. Okay, now that'll appear in a new window. Mine was kind of off to the side. And you should drag this window and dock it somewhere, and I would recommend somewhere sort of long and horizontal. It doesn't have to be tall, but it does need to be a bit wider horizontally, because this is going to be a timeline. That's how this animation works in Unity. It is a timeline which shows events happening at different points in time. This is very similar if you've ever used something like Adobe Animate or Adobe Premiere, where you see different keyframes happening at different points in time. That is exactly how your animation works in Unity. You have these keyframes over a timeline. Okay, so we've got our animation window and we've got it docked somewhere on your screen. The next step is to select the game object that you wish to animate. So select your game object. Mine in this case is the player. And my player already has some movement set up on them. This game that I'm showing here is a mobile game, so they've got directional controls on the screen, which you can see in my game screen there. But yours doesn't have to be mobile. It doesn't even have to have any movement set up on it for this tutorial. But what you do need is to have some graphics created for that player. Okay, so with your player selected, you're going to click on Create in your animation window. So now with the player, if I don't select anything, well, I can create an animation, but it won't be associated with my player. If I select my player and I click on Create in my animation window, it's going to associate that animation with the player, and it's going to automatically attach some components to my player that will be used for the animation. So with my player selected, I click Create, and now I get a pop-up that will ask me where I want to put the animation that I'm about to create. So I'm going to create a folder for it called Animations, and I suggest you do the same. We want to always keep our Unity project assets folder tidy and with things put away into folders. If you don't and you have a large project, it very quickly becomes very confusing and hard to find things. So I recommend keeping it organized and putting things into folders. So now I've got an animations folder, and then I'm not going to leave this as new animation. I'm going to describe the animation that I am creating. And in this case, I'm going to create a walking down animation to show my player walking downwards. So walk down.anim is what I'm going to create. Okay, so I have walkdown.anim. It's now been created. If I look in my project folder over here, project window, you can see that I actually have two files that were created in my animations folder. And the first is an animator or an animator controller. And that is something that we'll cover in the next tutorial, but it will be used to change between animations on an object. And you'll only have one animator per object, but that object could have multiple animations. And I know I'm emphasizing those words a little bit weirdly, but it's so that it's really clear what I'm talking about. So an animator, or animator, as I like to say to make it very clear, is for changing between animations or animations. Right, so we've created an animation, and that is now called Walk Down, and you can see it has a file in that folder as well. And also in our animation window down at the bottom here, we can see that we also have a walk down animation shown in this drop down. And we also have a blank timeline that has now appeared and a button that says add property, which we're not going to use right now. Okay, so our animation is there, but it's blank. It's all ready to go, but it's blank. So we now need to add sprites to our animation. So there's a lot of ways you can do this, but the easiest one by far is to simply select all the sprites that you want to put into your animation and to then drag all at once in a big pile, all the sprites onto the animation window, and it will automatically create an animation of those sprites in order in your animation. So I have already prepared a series of sprites for this player's animation. And I've got those in a big sprite sheet and it's sliced into multiple pieces. So if you need help doing that, I have a previous tutorial about that. But hopefully you already are at that point. So if you have your sprites, they can be on separate images and that's absolutely fine. But I personally have mine all in one big sprite sheet and they are sliced into these individual frames of animation from that sprite sheet. So my sprite sheet, I'll go ahead and open it up so you can see. My sprite sheet actually contains multiple animations. It contains 4 different animations. One for walking downwards or towards, us. One for walking upwards or away from us. One for walking left and one for walking right. So I don't want all of these animations in a single clip because then my player would play in order, like 2 steps towards us, 2 steps to the right, 2 steps back, and 2 steps to the left. It would look like they were dancing. We don't want their player to dance, we want them to walk. Now, if you were trying to get them to dance, then you could use all of these frames in a row, but that is not what we want in this case. So instead of selecting, if I wanted them to dance, I would select all of these. Instead, I'm going to only select the first 4. Okay, and I can look at each one, and if you expand your preview frame, and you can see, I can actually look at each one of these and see that they are in fact the images that I want. So I'm going to select all of them, and you can select multiple items in your project view by clicking on one of them, holding down Shift, and clicking on the furthest one. It will select everything in between, or you can click on one of them, then hold down Control, and then select each one individually. So that's the 2 options, but you want to select as many, all of your animation frames at once. Once you have the frames for your animation selected, you're going to drag those frames over into the animation window. And now I've done that, and it has added these keyframes to my animation, and it's added a sprite property to the list. So what this means is that it is going to be changing that property at each of those points in time. And then it will just repeat. So it's going to be changing the sprite on my player to a different sprite at different points in time. And that's how sprite-based animation works. It's simply changing the image that is displayed over time. So to preview this, you can click on play. Now you may notice it's a little bit hard to see in the recording, but my guy is actually moving really, really fast, faster than can be recorded. So he's moving too fast, and we need to change that. So the easiest way to change that, mine already has samples shown here, but I think by default Unity no longer shows the sample rate on your animation. So to get that sample rate to show, you're going to click this little cog wheel in the top right corner of the animation, and you're going to click on show sample rate. So mine is already shown, and it's running at 60 frames per second. Now, for many animations you may have created, that is probably a bit too fast. If you're using something like Piskel, you may have created your animation at 12 frames per second. I believe that's the default in Piskel. If you've used something else, you'll need to make sure that you either look at the animation that you made and figure out the frames per second from that, or just try a few different sample rates and find one that suits your animation. So if I change mine now to 12, which is a much more reasonable animation speed, and I press play, we'll see that he is now moving at a somewhat more reasonable pace. It's not the greatest animation, this one, so don't be too put off by it. Hopefully your animation will look much nicer. These assets I'm using, by the way, are free assets from Kenny Assets. It's a website that allows you to use their assets in pretty much anything. Most of the assets there are completely free to use and don't even require attribution. They use what's called a Creative Commons Zero license or public domain. So it's a really lovely website. I do recommend using it for placeholder assets while you are developing your games. They are just incredibly useful in that way. I wouldn't recommend using any of those assets for finished games, however, because they do look a bit, it becomes a bit obvious when everyone's using the same assets. And it won't be quite, you want to have your own flavor to your game. Anyway, I digress. So we now have an animation that is playing when my player walks, which is absolutely fantastic. We're basically ready to go now. However, I do have multiple animations I want to create. So to create another animation, all you have to do is, whilst having your player selected, make sure they're selected in the hierarchy, you go down to the animation window, and instead of walk down, you click on the walk down or whatever you've named your animation in the top of the animation window, the drop down there, and you'll see that you can see your current animation, and then you can create more animations for this object. And so you do create clip, and it's the exact same thing we originally saw when we created our walk down animation. So I'm going to make a walk right animation, and I just continue as I did before. So that's all there is to creating animations in Unity. You can see our next tutorial to learn how to actually use an animator controller and to switch animations during Unity, during the game being played. So that'll be in the next tutorial. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and add them down in the comments below, and I hope this was very useful to you. Bye!